Birthdays are supposed to be special, a day when you feel like the center of the universe, even if just for a moment. Mine started off that way. I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and the faint sound of Sophia humming in the kitchen. It wasn't unusual for her to hum while cooking. She'd always done that, especially when she was in a good mood. "Happy birthday, handsome," she said, leaning over to kiss me as I walked into the kitchen. She was making my favorite, pancakes with strawberries and whipped cream. Her hair was tied back, and she wore an apron that had flour smudges on it, which made her look effortlessly beautiful. "Looks like I'm in for a good day," I said, smiling as I wrapped my arms around her. She laughed. "You deserve it." Sophia had been planning a surprise party for weeks, or so I thought. She wasn't the best at keeping secrets, and I'd caught her whispering on the phone to friends or sneaking notes into her purse. I played along, pretending not to notice, enjoying the thought that she was putting so much effort into making me feel loved. Our marriage hadn't always been easy, but we'd weathered every storm together. Or so I believed. We met in college, fell in love hard and fast, and built a life I was proud of. Sure, there were bumps along the way, like any marriage, but I thought we had something unbreakable. After breakfast, I left the house with a spring in my step. Sophia kissed me goodbye, her lips lingering on mine just long enough to make me feel like the luckiest man alive. "I'll see you tonight," she said, her eyes sparkling. "I can't wait," I replied, already imagining the celebration she'd planned. The day flew by in a blur of calls and meetings. My colleagues at work surprised me with a cake, and Marcus, my best friend, insisted on taking me out for a drink before the evening festivities. Everything felt perfect, until I realized I'd forgotten my wallet at home. It wasn't a big deal, really, but I needed it for the rest of the day. "I'll swing by the house and grab it," I told Marcus. "Meet you at the bar in half an hour." "Don't let the missus spoil you too much," he teased. I laughed, shaking my head. She's already outdone herself. The drive home felt routine, the streets and turns familiar. I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. Why would I? It was my birthday, and I was on top of the world. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a sleek black car parked out front. I frowned. It wasn't a car I recognized, but Sophia had mentioned deliveries for the party. Maybe it was the caterer or someone dropping off decorations. I walked up the front steps, keys jingling in my hand. The house was quiet, too quiet for someone who was supposed to be preparing for a celebration. As I stepped inside, I called out, "Sophia? You here?" No answer. The silence unnerved me. I set my briefcase down by the door and made my way toward the kitchen, where I assumed she'd be. The smell of something baking lingered in the air, but it wasn't the comforting aroma of a birthday treat. Instead, it felt off, like the scene of a play before the curtain rises. That's when I heard it. Laughter. A man's voice, deep and unfamiliar, followed by Sophia's unmistakable giggle. It wasn't the casual laugh she shared with friends or the hearty one she saved for my bad jokes. It was softer, more intimate. I froze for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought about calling out again, but decided against it. Instead, I moved quietly toward the kitchen, my footsteps light on the hardwood floor. When I reached the doorway, I saw them. Sophia and a man I'd never met before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. They were standing close, too close. His hand rested on her waist, and before I could process what I was seeing, he leaned in and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, not an innocent gesture. A real kiss. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "What the hell is going on here?" I said, my voice low and sharp. They both jumped, pulling apart as if they'd been caught committing a crime. Which, in a way, they had. Sophia's face turned pale, her eyes wide with panic. The man, David, as I would later learn, simply turned to me, his expression calm, almost amused. "It's nothing," he said, shrugging. "It's just a kiss." I stared at him, disbelief turning into rage. Just a kiss? Did he think that made it okay? That it somehow lessened the betrayal unfolding before my eyes? Before I could stop myself, I lunged at him. My fist connected with his jaw, the impact reverberating up my arm. He staggered back, clutching his face. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I didn't stop to think after my fist connected with his jaw. The sound of the impact echoed through the kitchen, followed by a guttural groan from the man, David, as I'd later learn. He stumbled back, clutching his face, his once smug demeanor replaced by shock and pain. Sophia screamed, her voice sharp and panicked. "Nathan, stop!" But I wasn't listening. I wasn't thinking. Rage had taken over, a primal need to make him pay for his audacity, for standing in my kitchen, in my home, kissing my wife. David tried to steady himself, his hand still pressed against his jaw. "You're crazy, man," he spat, his words slurred. "It was just a kiss." "Just a kiss?" I snarled, stepping toward him. "In my house? On my birthday? You think I'm going to let you walk out of here after this?" Sophia stepped between us, her arms outstretched, trying to create distance. "Nathan, please stop. He's hurt." Good, I thought bitterly. He deserved worse. David, clearly realizing he was outmatched, started edging toward the door. "I'm not dealing with this," he muttered. "You've got anger issues, man." "Get out," I growled, my voice low and menacing. "And don't ever come back." He didn't need to be told twice. He bolted out of the kitchen, nearly tripping over his own feet. I heard the front door slam behind him, the sound punctuating his cowardly retreat. As soon as he was gone, the adrenaline began to drain from my body, leaving me shaking and exhausted. Sophia stood frozen in front of me, her face pale, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Nathan," she began, her voice trembling. "I can explain." "Explain?" I barked, my anger reigniting. "What exactly is there to explain, Sophia? I just walked in on you kissing another man in our kitchen, on my birthday." She flinched at the venom in my voice, but I didn't care. I needed answers. I needed to understand how the woman I loved could betray me like this. "It wasn't what it looked like," she said weakly. I laughed bitterly. "Not what it looked like? Really? Because from where I was standing, it looked like you were cheating on me with some guy in a suit. Who is he, Sophia? Your coworker? Your boss?" She hesitated, and that pause was all the confirmation I needed. "He's my boss," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, the weight of her confession sinking in. My wife, the woman I had shared my life with for 8 years, had been kissing her boss in our kitchen. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. "How long?" I demanded, my voice cold. "What? How long has this been going on, Sophia?" "It's not like that," she said quickly, tears streaming down her face. "This was the first time, I swear. It just happened, Nathan. I didn't mean for it to happen." "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You expect me to believe that this was just some spur-of-the-moment thing? That you just accidentally fell into his arms?" She sobbed harder, her hands covering her face. "I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her apologies felt hollow, like empty words spoken out of desperation. I couldn't even look at her. The woman standing before me felt like a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen. "Nathan, wait," she called after me, but I didn't stop. I grabbed my car keys from the table near the front door and stepped outside, slamming the door behind me. I needed air. I needed to get away from her, from the house, from everything. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing with a mix of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. How had it come to this? Just hours ago, I'd thought my life was perfect. I'd woken up feeling loved and cherished, excited to celebrate another year with the woman I adored. And now, everything was in shambles. I drove aimlessly, the streets blurring past as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Memories of Sophia flooded my mind. Her laughter, her smile, the way she used to look at me with love and admiration. I had thought we were happy, that our marriage was solid. But now, all of that felt like a lie. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot and turned off the engine. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, my chest heaving as the reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. Sophia had betrayed me. On my birthday, no less. And the worst part? I wasn't sure what hurt more. The betrayal itself, or the fact that she'd kissed him in our home, the one place that was supposed to be a sanctuary. As I sat there, staring out at the darkened parking lot, one thought consumed me. I couldn't go back to pretending everything was okay. This wasn't something I could sweep under the rug. Sophia had broken my trust, and I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. I stayed in that parking lot for what felt like hours, staring into the void as the events of the day replayed in my head. My mind swung wildly between disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. Sophia's voice echoed in my ears, her weak attempts to explain, her desperate apologies. None of it mattered. The image of her locked in that kiss with David was burned into my mind, and no amount of words could erase it. Eventually, I decided to go back home. I didn't want to, but I had to. It was my house, after all. And if Sophia had the audacity to bring her boss there, I wasn't about to let her drive me away from the one place I should feel safe. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was still there. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever confrontation awaited me inside. The house was quiet when I entered. Too quiet. The kitchen lights were off, and the smell of whatever she'd been baking earlier still lingered in the air, now sickeningly sweet. I walked through the living room and found her sitting on the couch, her knees pulled up to her chest. She looked up when she heard me, her face streaked with tears. "Nathan," she said softly, her voice breaking. I ignored her and headed toward the stairs, determined to avoid another conversation. "Please," she called after me. "Just listen to me. I need to explain." I stopped at the base of the stairs, my hand gripping the banister. Slowly, I turned to face her. "Explain? What exactly do you think you can say to fix this, Sophia? Because I'd love to hear it." She stood, her movements hesitant, as if she were afraid to get too close. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I swear, Nathan, it didn't mean anything. It just happened." "It just happened?" I repeated, my tone cold. "So what, you accidentally tripped and fell into his arms? That's the best you've got?" She flinched at my sarcasm, but I didn't care. My patience was gone. "It was one kiss," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never done anything like this before." I promise I laughed bitterly. "One kiss, right, and I'm supposed to believe that, am I?" "It's the truth," she insisted, tears streaming down her face again. "I love you, Nathan. I made a terrible mistake, but I love you. Please don't let this ruin us." Her words stung more than they should have. A part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the possibility that this was just a momentary lapse in judgment. But the anger in me refused to let go. "Who is he?" I asked finally. She hesitated, and for a moment I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she said, "David, my boss." "Your boss," I said, my voice dripping with disdain. "The man you've been working late with, taking calls from, and spending extra hours at the office for. That boss?" She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Everything made sense now. The late nights, the unexplained phone calls, the times she'd seemed distracted or distant. How long had this been going on? How many lies had she told me to cover her tracks? How long? I demanded. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with panic. Nathan, it's not what you think. How long, Sophia? I snapped, cutting her off. It wasn't an affair, she said quickly. I swear it wasn't. This was the first time anything happened. I stared at her, trying to gauge whether she was telling the truth. But how could I trust her now? She'd already proven she was capable of lying to me. Do you have any idea what you've done? I asked, my voice quieter now, but no less intense. You didn't just betray me. You humiliated me. You brought him into our house, Sophia. Into our kitchen. On my birthday. She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm so sorry, she choked out. I hate myself for what I've done. Please, Nathan, give me a chance to make this right. I shook my head, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. I don't know if that's possible, I said. Her sobs grew louder as I turned and walked away, heading upstairs to our bedroom. Once inside, I locked the door and sank onto the edge of the bed. My head was pounding and my chest felt tight, like I could barely breathe. I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on the framed photos of us that lined the walls and dresser. Each one felt like a cruel reminder of what we used to have, and what we might never have again. I grabbed my phone and texted Marcus. Me. Can we meet? I need to talk. He responded almost immediately. Marcus. Of course. Where? I gave him the address of a bar not far from the house, desperate for an escape. Before I left, I grabbed a small suitcase and threw in some clothes. I couldn't stay here. Not tonight. Not with her. As I carried the bag down the stairs, Sophia stood at the bottom, her face a mixture of heartbreak and desperation. Where are you going? She asked, her voice barely audible. I need space, I said simply. She reached for my arm, but I pulled away. Nathan, please don't do this, she begged. This isn't me doing anything, I replied, my voice firm. This is you, Sophia. You did this. I walked out the door without looking back. The night air was cold as I stepped out of the house, my suitcase in one hand and my phone in the other. My heart felt heavy, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. How had it come to this? How had the woman I'd shared so much with, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, betrayed me so completely? I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, and drove to the bar where Marcus was waiting. The drive felt endless, the silence in the car deafening. I kept replaying the moment I walked into the kitchen and saw her with him. David. His smug, casual dismissal of their kiss haunted me. It's nothing. It's just a kiss. When I arrived, Marcus was already there, sitting in a booth with a couple of beers on the table. He looked up as I approached, concern etched on his face. You okay, man? He asked, though the answer was obvious. I dropped into the seat across from him, running a hand through my hair. No, I said bluntly. Not even close. What happened? He asked, leaning forward. I took a deep breath and told him everything. The kiss, David's arrogance, Sophia's panicked apologies. As I spoke, the emotions I'd been suppressing came flooding back. Anger, humiliation, heartbreak. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking and my voice was raw. Marcus let out a low whistle. Damn, he said. That's rough, man. I don't even know what to say. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Do I confront her again? Do I try to fix this, or do I just walk away? He shook his head. You need to figure out what you want. If you think there's a chance to salvage things, that's up to you. But if you can't trust her anymore, well, that's a whole different story. Trust. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. How could I ever trust her again after what I'd seen? We talked for hours, Marcus doing his best to offer advice and support, though even he admitted there were no easy answers. By the time I left the bar, it was nearly midnight, and I was no closer to figuring out my next move. I checked into a small hotel for the night, not ready to go back home. The room was quiet, almost eerily so, and the loneliness hit me hard. I thought about calling Sophia, but what would I even say? Instead, I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, as memories of our life together played in my mind. Our first date. The day I proposed. The way she used to look at me, like I was the only man in the world. When had that changed? And why hadn't I seen it? The next morning, I woke up feeling no better than I had the night before. I checked my phone and saw a string of missed calls and texts from Sophia. Sophia. Nathan, please come home. Sophia. I need to talk to you. Sophia. I'm so sorry, I love you. I deleted the messages without responding. Later that day, I called Gloria, our housekeeper, who had been with us for years. If anyone knew what had been going on behind my back, it was her. Gloria, it's Nathan, I said when she answered. Mr. Nathan, she said, sounding surprised. Is everything okay? I hesitated. Not really. Listen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course, she said, her tone cautious. Have you noticed anything strange between Sophia and her boss? David? There was a pause, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. I don't want to get involved, sir, she said finally. Gloria, please, I said, my voice breaking. I need to know the truth. She sighed. I've seen him at the house a couple of times when you weren't home, she admitted. They always said they were working on something for her job, but, well, it didn't seem right. Her words hit me like a blow to the chest. It wasn't just a kiss. There had been other moments, other times when she had betrayed my trust. Thank you, Gloria, I said, my voice tight. That's all I needed to know. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, my mind racing. Sophia had lied to me, repeatedly. And for what? For him? For a man who didn't even respect her enough to defend her when I caught them in the act? The anger I'd felt before returned, stronger than ever. But this time, it wasn't just directed at Sophia. It was also directed at myself, for being blind, for trusting her, for letting this happen under my nose. I called Marcus again, filling him in on what Gloria had told me. She's been lying to me for months, I said, my voice shaking. Sounds like it, he said. So what are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. But I can't just let this slide. He was quiet for a moment. Whatever you decide, just make sure it's what you want, not what your anger wants. Don't let them take any more from you than they already have. His words stuck with me as I hung up. I wasn't ready to forgive Sophia. I wasn't even sure if I could. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her or David off the hook. Not yet. The anger that burned in my chest wasn't something I could simply suppress. It demanded action, a need to know the full extent of what had been happening behind my back. Gloria's words kept replaying in my mind. I've seen him at the house a couple of times when you weren't home. That wasn't an accident. It wasn't just one kiss. There had to be more, and I was going to find out. I started my search the only way I knew how, through Sophia's phone records. She hadn't deleted her old bills, and I still had access to the shared online account. As I combed through the call logs, a pattern began to emerge. Frequent calls to a number I didn't recognize. David's number. There were dozens of calls over the past few months. Late at night, during my business trips, even on weekends when she'd told me she was out with friends. Each call felt like another crack in the foundation of everything I thought we'd built together. But I needed more than call logs. I needed hard evidence. I reached out to an old college friend, Ethan, who worked as a private investigator. Ethan wasn't someone I'd stayed in touch with regularly, but I knew he'd help me if I asked. Ethan, I need your help, I said when I called him. What's going on? He asked. I hesitated for a moment before telling him everything. The kiss, the lies, the phone calls. He listened without interrupting, his voice calm and professional when he finally spoke. All right, he said. I'll look into it. Give me his name and anything else you've got. I sent him David's full name, workplace, and phone number, along with the times I knew he'd been at the house. Ethan promised to start digging immediately. While Ethan worked on his end, I couldn't help but start my own investigation. I remembered Sophia's laptop sitting on her desk at home, often left unlocked. That evening, when I returned to grab a few things, I sat down at her desk and opened the lid. Her email was still logged in. I hesitated for a moment, my stomach twisting with guilt, but then I remembered the look on her face when I caught her kissing him, the lies she'd told me afterward. Whatever guilt I felt quickly evaporated. As I scrolled through her inbox, I found several emails from David. Most were work-related, at least on the surface, but the tone of some felt off, too friendly, too familiar. And then I found it. An email with the subject line, "Last night," caught my eye. My hands trembled as I clicked on it, and I read the words that confirmed everything I'd feared. I can't stop thinking about you. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. The email was dated 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. While I was out of town for work, they'd been together, and from the sound of it, it wasn't their first time. I felt a surge of rage so intense it made my vision blur. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just a kiss. It wasn't just a mistake. This had been going on for months. Lies stacked upon lies. The next morning, Ethan called me with his findings. "I've been following David for a few days," he said. "He's not exactly discreet. I've got pictures of him meeting Sophia at a cafe near her office, and I've spoken to a couple of people who work with them. Apparently their closeness has been the subject of gossip for a while now." Gossip. My wife had been the subject of office gossip, and I'd been blissfully unaware. "There's more," Ethan continued. "David's got a history. He's been involved with at least 2 other employees at different companies, both of whom ended up leaving their jobs after things went south. And his marriage? Barely holding on by a thread. His wife, Laura, probably has no idea what he's been up to." "Send me everything," I said, my voice cold. By the end of the day, I had a folder filled with evidence. Emails, photos, witness statements. It was more than enough to confront Sophia and expose David for the predator he was. But I wasn't ready to act just yet. I needed time to process everything, to figure out what I wanted to do next. Marcus, ever the voice of reason, reminded me to think carefully before making any decisions. "You've got the upper hand now," he said. "Don't do anything rash. Use this to your advantage." He was right, of course. As much as I wanted to storm into David's office and punch him again, I knew that wasn't the answer. I needed to be smarter than that. That evening, as I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, I realized something. I wasn't just angry at Sophia and David anymore. I was angry at myself for being blind, for trusting too easily, for letting my marriage deteriorate without noticing the signs. But that anger also gave me clarity. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to take control. The moment I decided to confront Sophia, a calm I hadn't felt in days washed over me. It wasn't the calm of forgiveness or understanding, far from it. It was the clarity of knowing exactly what I needed to do. The evidence Ethan had gathered left no room for doubt, no space for excuses. I wasn't walking into this conversation to hear her lies. I was walking in to tell her the truth I'd uncovered, and the truth about what was going to happen next. I called her and told her to meet me at home. My voice was cold, clipped, leaving no room for negotiation. She must have sensed the shift in me because she didn't argue or ask questions. When I arrived, her car was already in the driveway. I parked next to it and sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The house loomed in front of me, no longer the sanctuary it had once been. It felt tainted now, a monument to betrayal. I stepped out of the car and walked inside. Sophia was sitting on the couch, her hands wringing nervously in her lap. When she saw me, she stood, her eyes wide with apprehension. Nathan, she began, her voice trembling. Thank you for coming home. Sit down, I interrupted, my tone sharp. She flinched but obeyed, sinking back onto the couch. I sat in the armchair across from her, placing the folder of evidence on the coffee table between us. I've been busy, I said, gesturing to the folder. While you've been leaving me voicemails, begging for forgiveness, I've been uncovering the truth. Her eyes darted to the folder, then back to me. What truth? She asked hesitantly. Don't play dumb, Sophia. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I opened the folder and slid a photo across the table. A picture of her and David at a cafe, leaning in close, their body language unmistakable, her face drained of color. Nathan, it's not what it looks like, she stammered. Really? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Because it looks exactly like what I walked in on in our kitchen. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't let her. And it doesn't stop there, I continued, pulling out the email Ethan had recovered. I read it aloud, each word cutting through the room like a knife. I can't stop thinking about you. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. Tears filled her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. Nathan, please, let me explain, she pleaded. Oh, I'd love to hear your explanation, I said, leaning back in my chair. Go ahead. Tell me how this isn't what it looks like. Tell me how you weren't lying to me for months while sneaking around with him. I'm all ears. She sobbed, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. It wasn't supposed to happen. He started flirting with me at work, and I was flattered. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Nathan. I swear I never wanted to hurt you. Flattered? I repeated, my voice rising. That's your excuse? You were flattered, so you threw away 8 years of marriage for him? I was stupid, she cried. I didn't think. I let it get out of control, but it didn't mean anything. I love you, Nathan. Only you. I laughed bitterly. Love? Don't talk to me about love, Sophia. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't cheat. Love doesn't bring another man into our home and kiss him in our kitchen on my birthday. She buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. I'm sorry, she whispered. Sorry doesn't cut it, I said firmly. You didn't just betray me, you disrespected me, you humiliated me, and you think a few tears and an apology will make it better? Her shoulders shook as she cried harder, but I felt no sympathy. You need to pack your things, I said after a long silence. You're leaving. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. What? You heard me, I said. This marriage is over. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from her soon. Nathan, please, she begged, sliding off the couch and onto her knees in front of me. Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll quit my job. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. I stared at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything in the world. But the love I'd felt was buried now, smothered by anger and betrayal. You gave up on us the moment you chose him, I said, my voice cold. Her sobs filled the room as I stood and walked away. I didn't look back. I couldn't. As I left the house, a strange sense of relief washed over me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was taking control. But I wasn't done yet. David still needed to face the consequences of what he'd done. After leaving Sophia in a crumpled heap of apologies and tears, I turned my focus to David. He wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. He'd treated my marriage and my life with utter disregard, waltzing into my home and disrespecting me without a second thought. It wasn't enough that I had broken his jaw. He needed to face the full weight of what he had done. The evidence Ethan had gathered was a gold mine, and I intended to use it to dismantle David's life piece by piece. He wasn't just a man who had seduced my wife. He was a serial predator, using his position of power to manipulate women. It was time to expose him. The first thing I did was contact David's HR department. Ethan had provided me with accounts from 2 of his former employees, women who had left their jobs because of his inappropriate behavior. They were hesitant to come forward, fearing retaliation, but I assured them that I'd protect their identities. I sent an anonymous email to the HR director, attaching the accounts, photos, and emails I'd collected. I laid it all out: David's predatory behavior, his inappropriate relationships with subordinates, and the toxic work environment he'd cultivated. Within a week, David was called into a meeting with the HR team and senior executives. Ethan, who had eyes on the office, reported back to me. "They suspended him," Ethan said, "pending an investigation." I smiled. That was step 1. Next, I turned my attention to David's wife, Laura. From what Ethan had uncovered, she was blissfully unaware of her husband's extracurricular activities. I wrestled with whether or not to involve her. It felt cruel to drag another innocent person into this mess. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Laura deserved to know the truth. I contacted her anonymously, sending her a letter along with the evidence I had gathered. I kept the tone neutral, stating only that I thought she should be aware of her husband's actions. A few days later, I got a call from Ethan. "She threw him out," he said. "Apparently, she found more on his phone after you sent the letter. Texts, photos, the works. She's filing for divorce." I didn't feel joy at her pain, but I felt vindicated. David's perfect life was crumbling, just as he tried to destroy mine. For the final blow, I turned to social media. Using a throwaway account, I posted screenshots of David's inappropriate emails and photos of him with Sophia and other women. I didn't include names or identifiable details for the women involved, only David's name and actions. The post went viral almost immediately. Comments poured in, people condemning him and sharing stories of similar experiences with men in power. The scandal made its way to local news outlets, and soon David's name was tarnished beyond repair. It didn't take long for David's world to implode. He lost his job, his marriage, and his reputation. His once charismatic presence was reduced to whispers of shame. One afternoon, I saw him for the first time since the night in the kitchen. He was sitting alone on a bench outside a coffee shop, his arms still in a sling from the broken jaw I'd given him. He looked disheveled, his once expensive suit wrinkled and ill-fitting. I debated whether to approach him. Part of me wanted to rub his downfall in his face, but another part of me felt nothing but pity. He'd destroyed himself. I walked past him without saying a word. He didn't look up, and I didn't stop. Later that evening, I met Marcus for a drink. He raised his glass to me as I sat down. "Cheers to justice," he said. I smirked. "Cheers." We clinked glasses, the sound crisp and satisfying. "Was it worth it?" he asked after a moment. I thought about it. Was it worth it? David had been exposed, humiliated, and stripped of everything he'd held dear. Sophia was left to grapple with the wreckage of our marriage. I'd taken control of the situation, ensuring that neither of them would walk away unscathed. "Yes," I said finally. "It was worth it." Marcus nodded. "Good. Now it's time to focus on you. What's next?" I didn't have an answer for him. Not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this define me. David's reckoning marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure. The anger that had consumed me began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild my life. Sophia still tried to contact me, leaving voicemails and sending emails filled with apologies and promises to change. But I didn't respond. My focus was no longer on her or David. It was on me. The days following David's downfall were quieter, but not in the comforting way they once were. The silence of the house was heavy, a constant reminder of what had been lost. I had no intention of reaching out to Sophia, but that didn't stop her from trying. She called and texted relentlessly, leaving messages that ranged from desperate apologies to tearful confessions. At first, I ignored them all. But one day, curiosity got the better of me. I played one of her voicemails. "Nathan," her voice cracked with emotion. "I know you hate me, and I don't blame you. But please, just listen. I've resigned from my job. I couldn't stay there. Not after everything. I'm going to therapy. I'm trying to figure out why I did what I did, and how I let myself hurt the person I love the most. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know I'm trying. For you. For us. For myself." Her words hung in the air long after the voicemail ended. I didn't feel pity or forgiveness, but I did feel something. Maybe a flicker of curiosity. Over the next few weeks, Sophia sent me updates about her progress. She emailed me copies of her resignation letter and messages from her therapist confirming her appointments. She wrote long letters reflecting on her mistakes and the choices that had led to her betrayal. One letter stood out. "Nathan, I know I can't undo what I've done. I broke your trust, and I broke us. I've spent every day since that night thinking about the ways I failed you and failed myself. I've realized that part of the reason I let things with David happen was because I was insecure. I felt small next to you, watching you thrive in your career while I struggled to find purpose in mine. But instead of talking to you about it, I let my weakness consume me. It doesn't excuse what I did, nothing ever could, but I want you to know I see it now. I still love you, Nathan, and I always will. But if I never get another chance with you, I'll understand. Just know that I'm going to keep working on myself, whether you're in my life or not." Sophia. Reading her words stirred something in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the smallest seed of empathy. After weeks of silence, I agreed to meet her. We chose a neutral location, a quiet cafe where no one would recognize us. She looked different when I arrived, thinner, paler, and wearing no makeup, as if she didn't have the energy to maintain her usual polished appearance. "Nathan," she said softly when I sat down across from her. I nodded, my face neutral. "Sophia." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she took a deep breath and said, "Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you would." "Why did you want to meet?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. She hesitated, then said, "I needed to look you in the eyes and tell you how sorry I am. Not through a voicemail or a letter, but face to face." Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I betrayed you in the worst way possible, and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But I need you to know that I'm trying to be better. For myself, and because you deserve better than the person I was." I watched her carefully, searching her face for any signs of manipulation or insincerity. But all I saw was a broken woman who was trying, in her own way, to put herself back together. "What do you want from me, Sophia?" I asked finally. "Nothing," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry and that I'm working on myself." I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. That night, I found myself thinking about Sophia more than I had in weeks. Not about her betrayal, but about the woman she used to be. The woman I fell in love with. Was it possible for her to become that woman again? Or was the damage too deep? Marcus called me that evening, checking in like he always did. "How was the meeting?" he asked. "Hard," I admitted. "But I think she's trying, Marcus. Really trying." "Do you think you can forgive her?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe, but not now, not yet." In the weeks that followed, Sophia continued her efforts to change. She moved out of our house and into a small apartment, working part-time while focusing on her therapy. She didn't contact me as often, but when she did, her updates were thoughtful and honest. For the first time, I saw her taking responsibility for her actions, not just to win me back, but because she genuinely wanted to grow. It was a small comfort, but it was a start. I didn't forgive Sophia overnight. It was a process, a battle between my anger and the love I once had for her. But as time passed, I realized that holding on to my anger wasn't serving me anymore. One evening, I sat down and wrote her a letter. Sophia, I've seen the work you're doing, and I respect it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you for taking responsibility and making changes. For now, I need space to continue healing on my own. Take care of yourself. Nathan. I didn't know where the road would lead us, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. The days stretched into weeks, and life began to take on a new rhythm. It wasn't the same as before. How could it be? But it was steady. I focused on myself, my work, and rediscovering who I was outside of the roles of husband and victim. Sophia's absence in the house was palpable, yet oddly liberating. There were no awkward silences, no lingering tension. Just me, and the quiet hum of a life I was slowly piecing back together. Still, she lingered in my thoughts, not as a constant ache, but as an unresolved question. Could I ever trust her again? Could I forgive her? Sophia, for her part, continued to stay in touch sparingly. Her updates were concise but meaningful, often sharing progress, from her therapy sessions or reflections on the choices she had made. She wasn't begging for reconciliation anymore, which made her words feel more genuine. One day, Marcus invited me over for a barbecue, insisting I needed to get out of the house and be around normal people for once. I hesitated at first, but I went, realizing I needed to rejoin the world. "Good to see you, man," Marcus said, handing me a beer. "You look less miserable." "Thanks," I replied dryly, though I knew he meant it kindly. As the afternoon went on, surrounded by friends and laughter, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: contentment. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Later that night, back home, I found myself scrolling through Sophia's messages. Her most recent one caught my attention. "Nathan, I'm learning to forgive myself. I know I hurt you, and I'll regret that forever. But I'm starting to see myself clearly for the first time in years. I hope you're healing too. You deserve that." Her words struck a chord. Forgiving myself. Healing. It was something I hadn't considered. I had spent so much time focused on what Sophia had done to me that I hadn't addressed the anger I harbored toward myself, for trusting her, for missing the signs, for feeling like I wasn't enough. That night, I sat down and wrote her another letter. "Sophia, I'm not ready to forgive you, but I'm starting to understand the value of letting go. Not for you, but for me. I'm moving forward, and I hope you are too. Wherever this road takes us, I wish you the best." I wasn't sure what the future held, whether we would ever reconcile, or if this was the final chapter in our story. But for the first time, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads with a clear head, ready to choose my own path forward. As time passed, the chaos and pain of Sophia's betrayal began to fade. It wasn't that I forgot what had happened. I could never forget. But I started to carry it differently. It became less of a wound and more of a scar, a part of my story but not the defining chapter. I sold the house. The memories it held, both good and bad, were too heavy to keep living with. I found a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, just enough for me. It felt like a fresh start, a blank slate where I could rebuild myself without the shadow of the past looming over me. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into it, not out of avoidance, but because it reminded me of my capabilities, my value. I started running in the mornings and picked up an old guitar I hadn't touched in years. Little by little, I began to reclaim pieces of myself that I'd lost somewhere along the way. Sophia and I spoke less frequently as the months went on. Her messages became sporadic, short updates about her life and progress. She told me she had started volunteering at a local shelter and that therapy was helping her unpack not just the betrayal, but the reasons behind it. She always ended her messages the same way. I hope you're doing well. And I was. One day, I ran into Marcus at a coffee shop. We sat down to catch up, and he grinned as he said, "You look good, man. Like, really good." "I feel good," I admitted. "Better than I have in a long time." "So, what's next?" he asked. I thought about his question. For so long, I had been consumed by the past, by the anger and heartbreak of what Sophia and David had done. But now, for the first time, I was looking forward. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm ready to find out." As I walked back to my apartment, the city buzzing with life around me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was mine. This wasn't the story of a man defined by betrayal. It was the story of a man who had endured it, learned from it, and come out stronger on the other side. I didn't know where the road ahead would lead, but I was ready to take the first step.